Good morning, football fans. Welcome to a Tuesday episode of the Call Sheet Daily podcast here at the Fans First Sports Network. I'm your host, Coach Kevin Smith. Welcome aboard, everybody. Interesting Tuesday topic here for us because today, May 6th, commemorates some interesting events in sporting history. Really some interesting events, not necessarily today, but the last couple of days in our culture as a whole. Yesterday, May 5th, was Cinco de Mayo. If that is something that people celebrate, I think it's an excuse for people to go to the bar, that have some margaritas. That's become sort of a tradition for a lot of people. It was also yesterday, May 5th, National Hoagie Day. I don't know if you celebrated that or not. I think there's an interesting debate over the phrase National Hoagie Day because it's hoagies to some people, it's subs to some people. Out on Long Island, for some reason, they call hoagies and subs grinders. I remember going to college and all the Long Island people were like, "Hey, let's get grinders." I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But today is a fascinating anniversary. Today is May 6th, and on this date in 1954, the British track star Roger Bannister became the first person to ever run a sub 4-minute mile. And that was an accomplishment that many people believed in that era could not be done. That the sub 4-minute mile was just not humanly possible. And Roger Bannister was an unlikely candidate to do it. He was a young man who had attended Oxford University, actually was attending Oxford at that time, studying to be a neurosurgeon. And he had run in the Olympics in 1952, but not as a miler. The mile wasn't even his specialty. And he did it on a bad track in a day where the conditions weren't necessarily optimal. And it's interesting, his record only held for about 40 days. It was broken pretty quickly. But the fact that he did it, and of course that he became the first, makes Roger Bannister a name that I don't know how many people listening recognize that name, but he is in that elite club of notable record holders, people whose records will be long remembered, if not forever remembered. People are almost always going to be able to cite that as the answer to a fairly common trivia question. Who was the first person to run a sub 4-minute mile? A lot of people can answer that. Roger Bannister. And he did it way back in 1954. The record, by the way, for the mile now, the current record is 3 minutes, 43 seconds. So while Roger Bannister, who ran a time of 3:59.4, set that record 71 years ago, humankind hasn't improved upon it significantly in those 71 years. You've trimmed 16 seconds off of his time, which is a lot, but it's not like we're threatening to run a sub 3-minute mile. There appear to be limits to which the human body can actually do this thing, run a mile. And we're not that further from where Roger Bannister did it. Women have never broken the 4-minute mile. The women's record is 4:07. So that'll be something that'll be fascinating. One day, I would imagine a woman is going to run a sub 4-minute mile, and that's going to be big news. But in light of the fact that this is the 71st anniversary of Roger Bannister breaking the sub 4-minute mile, I started to look at lists of what are some of the greatest sports records of all time? I was just curious. I didn't even have a call sheet episode in mind when I started to look at this stuff. What are some of the greatest sports records of all time? And I began to just kind of, go through Google and different search engines and pull up results. And it was very interesting because in every single search that I did, I could not find an NFL record listed among the top 10 or so. Almost all of these records were common to other sports or to individual sports. Here are some of the ones that were most commonly listed when I did searches of the greatest sports records of all time. Wilt Chamberlain scoring 100 points in a single basketball game was at the top of just about every list. And that is a record that will almost certainly not be eclipsed. Kobe Bryant came fairly close when he scored 81 points in his final season. But that was largely in an effort, understanding that Kobe Bryant was retiring, to allow him to accumulate as many points as possible. It was like a concerted effort by the Lakers at that time to try to get Kobe Bryant as close as they could to Wilt's record. In the course of a natural game, nobody's ever going to score 100 points again, unless a game goes like 7 overtimes or something absurd like that. Another record that almost everybody believed is unbreakable. Cal Ripken's baseball streak of 2,632 consecutive games. The Iron Man streak, which is, when you think about it, it's an absurd number, because if you're just doing the math, it essentially constitutes Cal Ripken playing 16 plus straight seasons of 162 games where he doesn't miss any. That will not ever be broken. Nobody does that anymore. You have built-in days off. My gosh, Major League Baseball, they play 162 games, which is absurd to begin with. And imagine now a player playing every one of those for 16 plus straight seasons. I just can't foresee a scenario where that happens again. Usain Bolt is the current record holder in the 100 with a time of 9.58 seconds. Nobody else has run sub 9.7. Now, because of the immediacy of that race, the separation between 9.58 and 9.7 is significant. And while there will probably be somebody down the road who will break that record stands as particularly impressive simply because the distance between Bolt and the next best time. Here are some other records that were mentioned in many of these lists. Roger Federer going 237 consecutive weeks at number 1 in tennis. Lionel Messi scoring 91 goals in the 2011-2012 professional soccer. I don't know soccer well enough to even context that accurately. Interesting one that got referenced a lot. Roger Maris's 61 home runs in a single season set back in 1960, which held for over 30 some years until the PED era kicked in baseball, and guys like Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire, Barry Bonds broke that record. And that record, of course, will always have an asterisk, because who knows what that record may have been had that PED era not come around. Sosa, McGwire, Bonds, A-Rod, all those guys were using performance-enhancing drugs. Could they have hit more than 61 home runs in a season without them? That's an interesting debate. But Maris's record was thought for a long time to be the ultimate American sporting record. People love the home run. The home run is identified with individual success. It was akin to being the heavyweight champion of the baseball world, holding that home run record. And now it's hard to assess it because, again, the PEDs have tainted it. And I'll throw one more in there. Wayne Gretzky's 894 goals were long seen as one of the greatest records in North American sports. And interestingly, just a couple of months ago, Alex Ovechkin broke that record. That was thought by many at the time when Gretzky said it to be an unbreakable record. Well, you know what's fascinating about all these records that I just talked about? Nowhere in there do you find anything related to the National Football League. And in Googling all these top 10 lists, I hardly ever found any American football record mentioned. There was one list of the top 20 records in sports, where at number 14, I found Jerry Rice's receiving yards record. And this is astounding when you think about it, because you want to talk about a record that stands to be unbreakable. Jerry Rice had 22,895 receiving yards throughout his NFL career. 22,895. He had 14,000-yard seasons as a receiver. 14. So if you come into the league at 22 years old, that's basically 1,000+ yard receiving season every year until you're at least 35. And then you got to tack on a bunch more, not 1,000-yard seasons, but good seasons to get yourself to almost 23,000, where Jerry Rice is. The guy in second place is Larry Fitzgerald, and he is a full 5,000 yards behind Jerry Rice. 5,000 yards. And this is even more impressive when you consider Jerry Rice's career spanned the years 1985 to 2004, when the passing game wasn't nearly as emphasized as it is in the sport of football today. So Jerry Rice largely did this in an era where running the ball was the predominant form of offensive strategy. Now, granted, he played for the 49ers, who had a different approach. Their West Coast passing attack used the pass more aggressively than many other schemes of that day. But still, 22,895 receiving yards, 5,000 yards better than any other receiver to play the game. That should be near the top of all of these lists of the greatest records. But few people can cite that. And I believe it's because of a very fundamental thing. And that fundamental thing is this: NFL football and football in general is such a team sport that people don't really pinpoint or remember or emphasize the individual records like they do in other sports. And granted, all team-oriented sports require teamwork to be successful, but none of them are reliant upon teamwork the way that football is. You got 11 guys that you have to orchestrate together. And those 11 guys have to work as one. One of the most common phrases that football coaches use is 11 together as one. You hear it all the time. And yes, there are other sports where you have 11 players on the field, or you have a large number of players on the field. Soccer and lacrosse come immediately to mind. Hockey is an incredibly team-oriented sport. But the difference between all of those sports, lacrosse, soccer, hockey, and football, is this: in all of them, if you have a dominant goalie, you can stifle a superior opponent. In all of them, you can use a pack-it-in strategy. The NHL used to have the trap. They've kind of outlawed it now. They haven't really outlawed it, but they've de-emphasized icing to allow the red line in the middle of the rink to allow for teams to play a little more wide open style to beat the trap. Because if you think back to the trap in the 90s and the early 2000s, teams like the New Jersey Devils used it to perfection to just clog up the middle of the ice and prevent prolific scoring offenses from getting into their sets. And it was aesthetically unpleasing, and the league decided, we need to open this sport up to make it more interesting. We need more offense. My buddy Pez here at Pez's Picks was a longtime soccer coach. He coached, he was the head coach of a very successful girls soccer program here. And he would talk all the time about how when they went up against a better team, they would just use the pack-it-in strategy. They would just pack in the defense, essentially clog up the area around the net. and just try to play for an ugly tie. He would say 1-1 or 0-0. Those are beautiful games when you have inferior talent. You can't do that in football. It's not a thing. In football, 11 together as one makes it the most team-oriented sport in the sporting landscape. In baseball, a dominant pitcher, a big power hitter can tilt a game. In all those other sports I mentioned, a dominant goalie. You could argue that in football, a dominant quarterback can do the same thing. But think about this. How well do those dominant quarterbacks do against other elite teams when they don't have a supporting cast, particularly an offensive line? How has Patrick Mahomes fared in Super Bowls when his offensive line has been inferior to the defensive lines or the defensive fronts of his opponents? The Eagles tore him up. You think back a few years when Kansas City lost their first Super Bowl. Mahomes was torn up by a Tampa Bay defense that was superior to his offensive line. Your best quarterback is reduced to a mediocre player when he doesn't have the proper supporting cast around him. There are really no other team sports that are like that. In almost all other team sports, there is a player or a small number of players who can dramatically tip the balance. In basketball, if you have 3 stars on your basketball team these days, you can win a championship. Heck, sometimes it's even 2 if one of those stars is dominant enough. Not the same in football. It's funny, when I was in grad school, I was doing research on ideas to write my thesis, which I ultimately landed on writing an economic history of the city of Atlantic City. Oh my God, what a nightmare. If you ever go to Atlantic City and you look around, you can see that there have been some serious mistakes made. And when I researched that paper and wrote that thesis, I was like, my God, this is a case study in corruption and greed and every possible thing you could do wrong from an economic perspective to destroy a city. But that's an aside. I settled on that as my topic. But I was doing research on a bunch of different things, and I came across a fascinating research paper. I have no idea who wrote it, some grad school student. And it was titled The Paradox of American Football. And basically the thesis went like this, that American football is the most macho sport you could think of. It's all testosterone and, dudes who believe in the sport being conducted a certain way. They love the physicality of it. They love the manliness of it, for lack of a better term. And they associate it with American capitalism, because American capitalism is a notion that is driven by the idea that if you work hard and if you're given the opportunity to succeed, you can. And that is something that is at the root of football. Hard work, devotion, dedication, you can't cheat, the grind, etc. But at its nature, football is very socialist. 11 together as one. There is no I in team. That the paradox of this macho sport, which is very American is in nature, and that American in nature, when you reflect it politically, oftentimes means individual values, the rejection of left-wing socialist type schemes. That football, the paradox of it is that it is the ultimate socialist sport. I thought that was such an interesting take on, for a research paper. And at its core, it's right. Football is so communal. You can't win unless you have a complete team effort. It is amazing how many times as a football coach, you dissect film and you look at a play and you say, why didn't this work? And it comes down to one player not doing his job. One mistake in the execution of the overall scheme. My God, we got 10 guys doing this perfectly. This is blocked so well. Why didn't this work? Oh, we had one breakdown. Football is the ultimate team game. And because of that, we don't necessarily recognize the individual achievements. You could probably name some of the big record holders. Many people probably know that Emmitt Smith is the all-time rusher. They probably know Jerry Rice is the all-time receiver. Off the top of my head, I don't know who the all-time leading sack leader is. I know Derek Thomas had the most sacks in the individual game. He had 7. But I don't know off the top of my head. I know Reggie White's near the top of that list, but I don't think he's the guy. I don't know who's had the most touchdowns of all time. Maybe it's Jerry Rice. I don't know. You just don't know because that is not emphasized. The individual accomplishment is not emphasized because the team weighs more. So on the 71st anniversary of Roger Bannister's breaking the sub 4-minute mile, thought it was a great opportunity to step back and honor football for being the greatest team sport on the planet. All right, that's our show for today. Tuesday, May 6th. Join me tomorrow, Whiteboard Wednesday, when we're going to get into breaking down scheme, one of my favorite days of the week. Until then, though, everybody, have a wonderful day. This has been Kevin Smith for the Call Sheet Daily. Take care, everybody.